Hello, my name is Dejan Boshkov, Grandmaster from Bulgaria. We continue our course of the typical Berlin endgames or exchanged Ruy-Lopez endgames that can arise in the games. The position that we see is from the game Ho Yufan as white against Bologan. It was played at the Moscow Open 2010 and it features a typical rook endgame. The rook endgames in the Berlin are usually about equal and everything depends first of all on the fact who is the one who had taken the only open file. In that case, this is the D file. If one of the players have seized that file, this means that most probably he is the one who has the advantage. And that's what it is right now. Black is having the advantage, despite the fact that he has so many pawn islands, and here he also has a doubled pawn. Much more important, and first of all, when we look at the endgames, is the activity of the pieces. The one who has more active pieces is ruling the game. Here it is black. The rook on d3 is a great asset. It's attacking the pawn on d3. The other one is always ready to help him with rook d7, and also that king on c7 has a very nice place to go, the e6 square, from where it can attack the pawn on e5. In the game, Ho decided to defend actively with rook e3. That's a good move. The thing is that black cannot really exchange those rooks. I mean, he can, but he is not really threatening to win that game, as after king f2, white is just keeping the zone she would like to play rook e2 and then rook e3. In case of rook d1, even rook e1 to defend that position. We know that the pawn endgames are unfavorable for the second player, so black cannot really do something here to improve the position. Furthermore, white can also think about playing for a win after g3 and to create a pass pawn along the h file. That's why Bologan decided to keep the two rooks on the board, and this is quite natural because both the rooks are much stronger than their counterparts. These two rooks on e1 and e3, they have to defend pawns, while the black rooks can be used in various ways. One is that rook can be used on the d file. It can be used also on the b file in case the black wants to make some breakthrough on the queen's flank, or even on the g file to attack the pawn, the backward pawn on g2. White has a choice now. She can either play for passive defense like she did in the game with king f2, or she can try to push the pawn, the pawn. This was possible. In that case, she is though losing a pawn. After rook takes e6, rook takes e6 fa, f takes e6, and rook at d3, there are some mass exchanges, but at the end, after rook b4 or rook a3, it doesn't really matter, black is winning the pawn on a4. The pawn by itself is important, but much more important thing is that in this kind of rook endgames, when we have races, the thing is who is faster, and in that case it seems that black is going to be faster as his pawns are more advanced. Moreover, he can eventually either protect those pawns with the kings, give them sufficient support, or if white starts giving him checks, he can come closer to the pawns on the king's flank to stab them, which means that black will have better chances in all the cases. That's why white most probably she decided not to go to this endgame, and instead she played king to f2. And here Bologan rushed to implement his plan. He played b5. This is quite typical, a very usual plan for the second player, but the thing is that he had even a better one. He could have played king to d7, bringing the king to an ideal position on e6. From e6, from now on, black can even trade rooks at some moment, and because he's winning the pawn on e5, and after that the king can get in via d4 or f4. And it's also very difficult for white to find use of her rooks. For example, in case of rook 3 to e2, let's say, then rook e8 is possible. Rook is coming along the semi-open g file, And if g3, if she tries to create counterplay like that, then rook g8 check, king f2. The king has to stay around the f pawn, otherwise rook d3 will be always on the agenda attacking 2 pawns at least, or first f4 and then rook to d3. That's why king f2, king e6 with the threat f4, rook d3. Let's say that white plays something like some semi-waiting move, rook b1, rook h8, and rook h5 will play black. After some preparation, he will start taking the pawns. For example, f4 is a threat followed by rook takes e5 at the moment, but also the rook on d3 can come, and the pawn on f4 is going to limit all the white's pieces, namely the king, but also the rook after the check on the second rank. And if she defends in another way, let's say that she plays after king d7, if she plays king to e2, trying to exchange rooks, then king e6 is again strong, and rook d3 can be faced by the simple king takes e5, not only gaining an important pawn, but also intending to activate the king either via f4 to g3 or via d4 to c3 and to come for the pawns. In that case, if this had happened in the game, black would have had reasonable chances for a win, actually very good chances for a win. In the game, like we said though, he rushed, he played b5. That's natural idea. He wants that after some exchanges to let free the king, and that king can be used eventually for attack of the b3 pawn. After a move like e6, white can play f4 first, some preparatory move. And again, like in the first line that we saw, there will be pawn races. And again, black should be much faster because his pawns have already reached the 5th rank. King is active, the king is supporting the pawns, and also the rook is active. So black will be much better here. Unfortunately for Bologan, Ho Yifan is not forced to take on b5. She can simply play a rook to c3. And this is where the real mistake by Bologan came. He could have taken, and he should have taken on a4, and then he could play a move like rook e8, bringing the rook into the game. Rook b8 and rook b4 is one idea to attack the weak pawns. After the trade of the b pawns, those 2 pawns became targets. After establishing control over the second open file, black won't be in a hurry. He can also bring the king to e6 to dominate completely over the board. Even though he has doubled pawns, they're doing really a good job. The rook on b4 will be defended by those double pawns, and also that c6 pawn is taking control over the b5 and d5 squares. And in that case, black would be much better. But instead he decided to sacrifice a pawn. He played f4, c takes b5, king b6, the c5 pawn was hanging, that's why king b6. Well, Ho Yifan gratefully took the pawn, rook c4, rook b7. Now things became too complicated. Black has obvious compensation in that case, as if we compare the kings and the rooks, we see that black is still dominating. But was there any sense in dominating being a pawn down when he could do it with equal number of pawns? In any case, the game is very interesting after that. Rook e1 was played, so white defended very well. She also created counterplay. She started to take the pawns on the king's flank. She took the pawn on f4 first, then the one on h4, and we reached this position in which black, even though he has 2 pawns less, still he has enough counterplay, again thanks to the more active pieces. Next he just wants to push the pawn to c2 and to play rook b1. Eventually that pawn can be supported with the king to c4 and king to b3. So more or less the position is still very unclear. She could have played for a draw if she liked, with the move rook to h5. After c3 she can trade many pawns, a couple of more pawns, but the thing is that she is also bringing back the active king in his camp. After rook b2, black will still have good compensation for the two pawns, but also white would be out of any danger of losing. She might be playing for win after rook b5 followed by a5. Although, to be honest, I believe that black should have enough chances to hold this, let's say after rook a2 and then either c2 or first even rook d7 and rook d2. Instead, in the game, she chose king to e2. Okay, rook h5 was a very difficult move, placing the rook, seemingly attacking nothing. The rook will be attacking its own pawn. So king e2 is more natural. Rook b4 was played. Now rook d1 check, king c5, e6 with a similar idea. Rook b4, this time the king though managed to come to b4, and this is making the white's position a bit more problematic. Now she's having problems. Rook to b3 check, king d2, and only after that king came to b4. Those pawns were swapped, and it appeared that white is having some problems with her king. There are always threats like check, check, and to take that rook. Rook on b2 is a check, very annoying. c3, if that rook leaves the fourth rank, is a check. And it seems like white has to be very careful if she wants to survive this. Rook c1 was the move in the game. Rook d7, king c2, check, king b1, rook d2, and now comes the decisive mistake. White didn't appreciate the danger that was in the position. She played rook g4 and got mated after rook b3 check and king a3. The attacking potential of the black pieces is too much. Rook a2 is cannot be stopped. But even if she had found the best defense, instead of defending the pawn on g2, if she had traded a pair of rooks, it's still very dangerous for the first player. Although with good defense, she might have defended this. Rook b2 check, takes the pawn. It is only black who can win that position after rook takes a5. Okay, if black wants to draw, he can always play rook g1 check and rook g2 perpetual. Let's say king c2, rook c5, king b3, or first c3, sorry, first c3, a5, king b3, check, the saving check. After king c4, rook b8, white should survive this because she's starting the checks from far away, and this should be a draw. But what was very important in this endgame, the pawn weaknesses are less important than the open files and the activity of the rooks. One more good thing for the Berlin players in the Berlin rook endgames is the fact that even though the pawns that he has still on the board are doubled, white is going to waste a lot of time to take them. While on the other hand, black's king can easily reach the central pawn and pick it up, making the defense of the opponent rather difficult. Also, the king on the king's flank is too far away from the remaining black pawns on c5. Usually there is always a pawn left, or even on the a file. And the game that we are now going to see is Karyakin as white against Wang Yue. That was played at the FIDE Grand Prix tournament in Baku 2008. After rook f6, king takes g4, rook takes e6, king f5, we will see that okay, black is not only winning a pawn. The dangerous thing for the first player is that his king on g2 will be a kind of excluded from the game. It will be very difficult for him to help the defense to stop the remaining passed pawn by the second player. Rook e7 was played. He also had a choice of defending passively with rook h6 and rook h3, but then it will be extremely difficult to save the game. Let's say after rook f8, the king is cut, and black and further on strengthened the position, coming closer with the king and then advancing the pawns. So this is not something that white would like to do, to suffer. Instead, he decided to exchange some pawns, to trade the pawns. He played rook e7, rook a3, the eternal problem of white in the Berlin is that those pawns are very vulnerable once the play is opened. Rook e6 was played, rook takes b3, and now king f2. In case of rook takes c7, black is just taking the pawn on e6, and further on the one on c4. For example, rook h7, king e5, rook h4, rook e3, just in time to build a kind of a bridge. Then rook is coming to e4, king d4, and king takes c4. That will be quite similar like what happened in the game, because the rook is on a perfect position. It is also not only stopping the influence of the rook towards the c pawn, but preventing the king from reaching the queen's flank, the white king. So in the game, after rook takes b3, white tried to come closer with the king f2, rook b4, threatening to take the important pawn. After that, two passed pawns will easily win at the end game. Let's say king e3, rook takes, and then check, an important check, rook takes e6, and black will have two extra pawns, which is naturally won. But maybe he could have tried king f3 to defend, as there is no this check. If the same line occurs, there is no rook e4 check, and if black takes king takes e6, there is rook c6, and the king is much closer than in the game. But instead, he played rook takes e7 immediately, king takes e6, the threat is king d6, and after that rook takes d4. That's why rook h7 was played. He took the pawn, check, king d5, rook takes b6, but black was just in time to play rook e4 and to cut the enemy king. Those endgames, the defender has very good chances to defend only if the pawn did not pass the 5th rank for black or the fourth rank for white in case of a frontal defense, which white tried. The point is that after giving too many checks, black will either have to retreat the king, or eventually white can offer a trade of the rooks once the king is too far away, and to approach with the king in front for drawing pawn endgame. However, here it is black to move, and he passes the equator. He plays c4, and this time the checks just doesn't help. For example, if he plays rook d1, then king c5, next king b4 is coming. Let's say that he tries to stop the pawn, check, check, king b2, and there is control. So the pawn is, there are no more checks, there is no enough space for the rook to give frontal checks, and this is just lost. The pawn is moving forward, and in the game he tried to trade the rooks after the immediate rook e1, but he is just one move short. c3 is played, he took the pawn, king takes e4, and after king e1, it doesn't really matter if king e1 or king e2. White resigned. King e2 will be the same. King d4. And black has won the opposition. It doesn't really matter for him. Black is just winning. Like we said, generally the endgames are okay for black, but sometimes it is also white who can use his trumps, and here he has the open file. This is the game Anand against Topalov. Topalov was to play. It was played in 2006. Obviously white is better here because he's holding the only open file, but after the move that Topalov played, the most natural one, he just took the pawn on e5, things became even worse for him as the rook started to penetrate in the opponent's camp. The only way to defend would have been to play h4, to leave one of the rooks for the defense on the back rank and the other one to get activated with rook h5, eventually rook f5, or even to attack the pawn on e5. But let's see just what happened into the game, why this was wrong. King takes e5, rook to e3. This is the better move rather than rook to e2. That rook can be used along the 3rd rank to torture the black king, and white is having great attacking potential now because of the two rooks. King f6, rook d7. We can see the difference between the rooks. it's enormous. So white is not only threatening to take that pawn on c7, but he's also threatening to play rook e3 and rook takes f7. It seems that his situation is very difficult. It was proved in the game. After, in case of rook a d8, white can, for example, first give a check and then take that pawn on f7, rook d to f7, keeping both the active rooks on the board and still attacking two pawns. Say rook d2, rook takes c7, rook takes c2 b3. It's good to keep one of the pawns on the board so that it will be easier to stop the opponent's pawns. Rook takes g7, rook d8. We say that it's very important who is faster in this type of endgames. Here it seems that it's going to be white. That's why his chances are much higher. For example, b5, rook f5. In addition, there is also a problem with that king. White can use it for attack and to bring it back to the 8th rank, eventually to combine the mating threats with the motion of the pawns. Rook d3, rook g6 check, king e7, rook takes c5. Okay, this is an exemplary line. It's not a must, but it's the moves are quite natural. The threat is always to give mate. King f8. Now the rook is coming from the other side. Rook to d6, check, king g2, rook e1. Black's rooks are passive. White's counterparts are much more active, and also white is moving the pawn with tempos because of the situation of the king on f8. So white seems to be winning here. What happened into the game was something similar. He didn't try to trade the rooks with rook d8, but he played rook h to f8 to defend the f7 pawn. Rook takes c7, restoring the material balance, but keeping the active pieces. g5, king f1, bringing the king to defend the d2 and d1 entry squares for the black rooks, but also it can just come on e3 after trading the rooks to defend all the squares. So h4 was played, a4 improving the position a bit, king g6, rook e to e7. It seems like black doesn't really have any counterplay. The pawn is also hanging. Black's pawns are going to start falling in any minute. So if he just moves that pawn, if he advances that pawn, then the b6 pawn is becoming a weakness. That rook is busy with the defense of the f7 pawn, and now, yes, it's very difficult situation for black. What happened was rook a to d8, king e2. So he's just defending those squares already. There is no counterplay for the second player. a5, rook c6 check, starting to take the pawns. Rook takes b6, rook d4, b3, c4, rook e6, takes the pawn, takes back. Again, that rook is inactive. King f5, rook e3, rook c8. Well, Topalov is, at least through his style, he's trying to get some activity at any cost, but after rook f3 check, he's further losing material. Yes, Anand just won. Rook takes f6, rook c2, king f1, check, rook e1, rook d2. Now the situation had turned into black's favor for activity, but in the process he lost too many pawns, and he's losing. Rook d2, king g1, not to take on f2 with checks. Rook to b2, check, king d4, he took the pawn on g5. Rook takes f2, one more check, king to d3. Rook e5 going for the other pawn. That rook here is going to defend the g2 pawn, and in case that both black rooks come on the first rank, then white will just take the pawn on h4, and that will be all. There will be escape route for the king. I mean, if he just tries to give him mate like that, and rook takes h4, the king is can escape by g3. That's why Topalov resigned.